Hi, I'm Brian Rosenberg, the founder of Gays with Kids. I'm excited to be with my friend Garon Wade, who is also a gay dad. We're in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Garon's memoir, You'll Always Be White to Me, is coming out June 15th, 2021.
Yes.
Garon, thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me about your book. Excited to be here.
Thank you.
To see you again in person. This is the second time in 7 years.
7 years, yeah. Last time was in DC.
In DC. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your family first?
Sure. So I met my husband in 2008 in DC, and 4 years later we got married, and we always wanted to have children. So it was, it took a lot of planning and a lot of kind of thoughtfulness on our part. But in 2012 we adopted our oldest son, who's now 8, Mateo, from DC, and then we recently, actually last year, got back from South Africa after a 4-year adoption process. For our youngest, Emmanuel. So it's been a long way to build our family. I think probably a lot of people who are familiar with Gays with Kids have watched families grow them in different ways, yeah. And for us, I'm just happy to sort of be at the finish line of that.
That's great. So does that mean no more?
We're done.
Your tubes are tied?
Yeah, they're done. They're tied and sealed.
All right, so we're here to talk again about your memoir.
Yes. You'll Always Be White to Me.
So you're 35 years old.
Yes.
will tell you up front, I've read it. It's awesome. And I already know the answer to this question, but I think a lot of people will say, he looks really young. How could he have written a memoir? So why the memoir and why now?
This memoir has been sort of in my head for over a decade. And there's certainly been a lot of people that I've met who have said, after they find out the way in which I grew up, who have said, you need to write your story. But sort of to your point, I'm 35. I mean, it just felt early. And in a lot of ways, it felt like I didn't know how I could actually do it because of just time-wise, right? I have a job, 2 kids. I mean, it's just a lot of work, right? And Carrie Fisher once said, take your broken heart and turn it into art. And because you've read the memoir, that there's a lot of really tough issues in this book. That was, when I sat down to write it, I decided that I really wanted to follow that guideline, but more practically speaking, I wanted to tell a story of the intersection of love, race, culture, and identity. I feel like in the United States, we're dealing in a time when race has made this huge resurgence, and at least in the news, and things as a society as we're all dealing with it. And this book speaks to that, I have white grandparents. I have a black and Mexican son. I have a South African son. I have a Filipino sister. I'm Sri Lankan American. My husband's Italian American. My brother's white but born in Africa. So sort of from every vantage point, I felt like I had something to offer to this conversation.
So speaking of that, the title.
Yes.
Talk to me about the title.
It's an interesting title, and I think from what I'm gathering early on is people have very strongly held ideas about what it means.
As I did.
As you did, and I love that. I meant for it to be provocative, and I meant for it to be questioned. I'm not going to say why it's titled that, because I want readers to be moving through the memoir and try to figure out for themselves who is saying it. Is it me? Is it a family member? Is it an employer? Is it a lover? Is it a neighbor? Yes.
Read the book is a big wow to me. And as a dad of a black American son, I can tell you it resonated with me. And when I realized the significance behind it, it really resonated with me, and it's powerful. And again, from my own experience, I'm glad you're talking about this and making sure that people are talking about it.
Thank you.
So, Garon, you were born in Sri Lanka in 1985. You were left on the steps of a hospital.
Correct.
That then took you to an orphanage.
Yes.
But after just a short time, the orphanage deemed that you were not strong enough or healthy enough to stay there, and so they sent you to a hospital for malnutrition. It was called the Jayamani Malnutrition Center in
Correct.
Colombo. And this was all in 1985 again. And to say I think it's interesting that we're talking now because I was there in 1985 in the fall, and I don't know. I just think it's serendipitous or just fate or something that here we are 35 years later.
And of course, I've known that for a while, and I've said to you before, there's not actually, I find in Europe, plenty of people have experienced Sri Lanka or have visited or familiar with. In the United States, it seems more rare that people know where Sri Lanka is, and oftentimes people will say, where's that? And I'll say, oh, it's an island off the coast of India. And they'll say, so basically you're from India. I'm like, no, it's actually, it's its own country. And they're like, but it's part of India? No. So I think too, it's sitting here in 2021 in Fort Lauderdale, how cool that, we are doing the very first interview for this book, and you have been to the country and were there when I was abandoned, I guess. Abandoned.
And I remember before arriving that there was concern between the civil war going on between the Tamils and the Sinhalese,
yes,
if I'm correct. Which I imagine contributed to whatever happened with your situation and the hospital, et cetera, not having records, et cetera.
Right.
So you were adopted by a white American aid worker couple.
Yes.
From the South here. I was wondering why they went to the hospital where you were and not to an orphanage to adopt a baby.
I think that's a great question. I think from what I was told growing up, that the Jayamani Malnutrition Center was close to their home, and they had heard that there was a boy there. I was the only boy there.
Oh, you were the only boy. Okay.
And so they had just left the Philippines where they had adopted my sister, and I think once my mom heard that, she made her way there to find out more, and it was very clear very quickly to them that adopting this child would be an option, and so they ran with it.
So, but did that place have experience?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. It acted very much like an orphanage.
Okay.
Because interestingly enough, since I've been contacted by other children who originated from there as well.
Wow,
Yeah.
I imagine that will happen even more once your book is out there. That's
possibly.
Fantastic. I can imagine that must really.
Yeah, it's strange, and it's really it's meaningful, but it's also sort of a strange experience.
Yeah. Anyone your age?
Within a year or two.
Wow.
Not exactly at the same time.
Right.
And from my understanding, most of those kids were adopted to the Netherlands or to the United Kingdom, whereas when I've been contacted, they've said we've never heard about an American boy, meaning they've never heard about a Sri Lankan boy that went to America. The rest are all across Europe, Australia, Netherlands, Germany.
So, born in Sri Lanka, you moved around a lot during your childhood. Yes. So, I'd love to know the most impactful experiences from each country in which you lived in. So if I say, for example, Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm. Sri Lanka for me was, this, while I don't have memories of it, there's so much spoken about it in my family. I think it was just so much more about me coming into a family. My sense of that country, and I have been back since, is like getting a chance, Somehow, being the only boy in this malnutrition center allowed me to move into this family.
Okay. South Africa.
South Africa is extraordinarily meaningful to me then and now. As I said, my son, is adopted from South Africa. But at that time, it was apartheid was still, apartheid was still happening. And so I think just the awareness as a kid that there was a racial divide, that we were living in a country where equality was not given to all people. That was the sort of serious side of it, and the amazing side of it were the animals. I mean, really, for a 5-6-year-old to be seeing elephants and giraffe and hippos on a sort of a daily, not daily, but like monthly basis, it was incredible.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
Also, where you stayed when you went to. When you were there, when you went back there, it sounded incredible.
It was incredible. It's called the Residence. If anyone wants, it's the
Well,
the Residence.
We're hoping so. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Hawaii.
Hawaii had that kind of duality to it too. As you know from the memoir, Domestic violence against the backdrop of the beautiful Pacific. It felt like it was the first time when I really understood my parents' marriage in a way that I felt I understood it in South Africa, but really got to see it play out in Hawaii, if that makes sense.
Okay. The Gambia.
Gambia's a tough one. The military takeover of 1994 was my first time being held up by a military officer.
I hope it's your only time.
It has been my only time, yes, from a military officer. There's been other times. Oh. But it was very freeing. Gambia was at the time, and I think to some degree still is, an extremely remote rural country, meaning there were very few paved roads. Even the road leading up to our house was not paved, so we would have to push our car through the sand on a daily basis, and that's not a joke, to get home. But I was in second grade able to ride my bike, to the ocean with my friends with no parents. There was nothing to really, it was like very free. And in some ways I enjoyed that kind of rural part of Africa far more than even South Africa, where we were living in a very wealthy white suburb of Johannesburg. Mm-hmm. This was the complete opposite.
Wow. Okay. Jordan.
That's a long one.
I was about to cry.
Yeah, Jordan is, when people ask me about Jordan, or they ask me which country was your favorite, I say I don't really have a favorite, but I have a one that was the most meaningful, the most formative, and that was certainly Jordan. I fell in love with the Arab world. My mom also died, so it was that it was very much, the two. When I still think about Jordan now, it's like it brings a giant smile to my face, and I can cry in 2 seconds. It was hard, and it shaped me immeasurably, and it will forever be the country that I remember probably the most with respect to my childhood, because I was there for the longest amount of time.
How old were you again when you were there?
I moved there when I was 13, and I graduated from high school at ACS Amman, which is the international school there, when I was 18.
Okay. So I want to come back to Jordan for a couple of reasons. You have to keep watching, don't turn that dial. But first, let's go with Jamaica.
Okay. Jamaica was probably the most fun place we lived, with nothing, there was no political problem there. So actually in that way, it was very much about friends. I mean, some of we lived in a condo there, which from the book, almost everywhere else was like it was a single family home behind big walls. And this was, living in an environment around tons of other kids from the international school. And the first time I felt that it was sexual, the first time that I felt a level of independence in my family from my brother and sister. I felt like it was the beginning of sort of an awakening. Okay. If that makes sense.
Louisiana.
Yeah.
Luling.
Luling, have you been?
I have not been. Okay. I do love New Orleans, though. My husband and I have been a couple of times.
Yeah, what a great city.
Yeah.
What a great American city. Luling was, as people will come to find out in this book, in this memoir, is the place you always go back to, right? It's where my mom grew up, and it's this very small Louisiana town on the west bank of the Mississippi River. And it's where, I became an American citizen there at the age of like 2.5, 3. And we would go back every summer. No matter where we lived in the world, we would return to Louisiana. And it was like another country. I mean, it really felt to me like I was really, from my perspective.
Oh, absolutely.
But I mean,
but I would think, to some respect, I might feel that way as well if I were to go there.
Maybe so. And I mean that in a great way.
Yeah.
A beautiful culture, a really rich culture, with people who just lived so differently than me, who sounded differently than me.
Yes, that's what I was thinking of too.
And I loved it. And the year that I lived there, which is what you're asking about, it was a year I got to be extremely close to my grandparents, my grandmother Asho, who everyone will come to know, and then also, was the first time I was called the N-word. So I think, through these questions, you're seeing that every place had really a good and a bad side to it, or an experience, not a side, but maybe an experience to it. And Yeah.
One thing I got, you were very close to your mom's family.
Yeah.
Your dad's family didn't seem to play into it as much. Did he not have as many relatives, or?
Yeah, great question. So I called him after I wrote the book and I said, Dad, my dad lives in Italy, and I said, Dad, I love you so much, and just so you know, your family's not in this book, and I feel terrible, but the truth was, writing about 2 families in Louisiana, I think would have been a lot for a reader to take in when there was so much on my mom's side. And really the heart of the book speaks to my mother's side. My father's parents were incredible, wonderful, and I loved them very much. But that's how they were. There wasn't a whole other side to the dynamic.
Understood.
So it wasn't written about.
I read the memoir, so I understand you should as well. So to continue sort of this theme about recurring themes of the book, you definitely, as you mentioned, address some heavy topics or issues. You did not shy away from them. I'd love for you to share what you hope to convey to readers about some of the themes that I found throughout the memoir. So first, love.
Yeah, I mean, in it's sort of a child's sense, or reference childhood, I mean, the love of a family, right? The thing that is, I think, not talked about a lot, but you know, or anyone would know, and you're an adoptive father, how powerful that is if you don't have it. A lot of people are born into it, and they are, I would say, maybe take it for granted. You know, there's plenty I take for granted too. I'm not saying I'm like an angel. But I think if you understand that you started without a family, that then you perhaps are far more grateful for a family. Your children, my children, myself. As I got older, and when I came out, love was, trying to find love as an adult was an entire thing that we all have that experience. And yeah, I mean, I got so lucky. My husband is wonderful.
So I'm going to go back, though.
Yeah,
That's great. I'm going to go back, staying on love, but going earlier back. You talk a lot about dealing with issues of racism and homophobia, et cetera, from loved ones.
Okay.
And so I'd love to just hear how you're able to do that. And you and I, we had a conversation the other day before I came here, talk about this, and you said something that I found pretty impactful. And so I'd love for you to share that about, when someone you love has opinions that are really, I don't want to say opinions that are different from yours, but that just beliefs that are built into them that are.
Sure. Okay, well, it's this idea that I think that we live in a society oftentimes where we choose one side or another. It's binary to some degree. You are a Republican or you're a Democrat. You are, a very proud American or you're not. You're for the war or you're not. I mean, this is the way it is. I think, unfortunately, in the United States, that's what happens when you have a two-party system, but that's an entirely different
conversation. That's your next book.
That's my next, yeah, right. Okay, in terms of love, and what you're talking about is Osho and I. I loved her very much. A Southern woman who was deeply racist, who was homophobic, who loved me, and I loved her, but it was complicated. And that sits at the very center of this memoir. I felt that in my life, it was important to try to find the common ground. Because I really do believe that if more people sat and talked about what they have in common versus what they view differently, you would probably find that people have more together. And she and I did have a lot. We did have a lot to share. It just always came back to those very same conversations around race, about being gay, that she could never really move forward. Though she made progress. Did you feel she made progress in the book?
Absolutely, she made progress. Not as much as I would have loved, just to be honest with you, because I really like you. And,
absolutely.
And, would want you to have all the support, et cetera, but she certainly made progress, yeah.
I think that it would have been easy to write her off. The easy thing would have been to stop talking to her. That would have made my life much easier, and I think it probably would have made, it would have made my life much easier. Because I lost my mother, I didn't want to lose her mother. And I fought really hard for many years to not.
And I imagine Jamie, your husband, was very supportive of that.
Absolutely. I mean, you're aware of his family as well.
Yes.
And actually probably many gay people who are watching this, who, maybe there's a person in their life who they don't correspond with or don't talk to because they're not accepting of
So I
And
want
then-
to actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because speaking of Jamie, he has a sister who was not very accepting of him being gay and his marriage to you, but when you became dads, that seemed to change, no?
Yes, that was supremely interesting to me to see how the introduction of a child into a gay couple, into a gay marriage, or as I like to call it, a marriage,
Thank
it can change someone's perspective. Because then I feel like from the outset, the person who doesn't want to, who is having some sort of problem with it, is now having to make the choice of, now do I not have a relationship with a child who is cute and seems to like me, and it brings in an entirely different
And I
world.
agree with that. And knowing Mateo, I have not met him in person, but he is adorable. But I also think it sort of helps to normalize our families when they see us with kids, which is a big part of what I hope to do with Gays with Kids as well.
Certainly.
All right, so continuing on,
Sure.
after love, and you already mentioned this, loss. It's certainly something you talk a lot about.
Yes. Loss in many different ways, right? Loss of my mother would be the biggest. I think that's actually too something that a lot of people probably experience. At a young age, it really changes your entire outlook on life. I felt like the moment that she died, within, the moment, but within a month, I realized that, everything had changed for me. I mean, I had to think about taking care of my little brother in a way that I'd never thought about before. And my dad is an amazing parent, but she was my emotional parent. And to lose that at 15, he stepped up big time. But they had this very traditional American husband-wife relationship, as most people did, who were born in the late 40s, and I think to him, he'll watch this. So hey, Dad, he'll say himself that I'm sure he woke up and said, "Oh shit, how do I raise 3 children?" In a way that she never would have had to question really. But he was being an excellent provider. That loss was extremely difficult. And to some degree, the loss of countries. A lot of people don't have this experience of moving from country to country every 3
Correct.
years. You establish an entire life. You have an entire identity. You speak the language sometimes. You have an entire social life. And then it ends. And then you start it all over again. That's hard, It's also really an incredible way to grow up, because you're forced into so many different new environments that I feel I truly believe that I can walk into almost any room and just find a conversation, find something interesting about someone, because I've sort of been exposed to so much. But on the downside, it's like you never had the continuity of relationships. So I'd say parental loss, country experiential loss.
But yet you seem to have done a really good job keeping in touch with the most important relationship you have from each of these places, or many of them, right?
I think that's part of if you don't do that, you don't have it at all. If you don't you're right. That's a really great observation. My friend Vasya in London, who grew up with me, and Jordan, JJ, and Salim, who you know now from the memoir. My teachers from Africa. I'm still my 2nd grade teacher. I just talked to her yesterday. Various people. I think we all realize that we grew up in a very unique way, and continuing these friendships across oceans is the way to always keep that in our life.
That's great. All right, so adoption.
Okay.
We can't not talk
No, we
and
must.
not really talk about adoption.
Yeah.
This adoption weighs very heavily in your life. I mean, it's a recurrent theme, right, for your family, et cetera. So you want to talk more about that?
Yeah. Adoption for a lot of people is a new thing, or maybe not new is not the right word, but perhaps it's something that they come into contact with tangentially, sort of like they know someone who is. My father's adopted. I'm adopted. My sister's adopted. My son is adopted. My other son is adopted. My uncle's adopted. So for us, it's almost generational. It is generational. It's not almost. It is generational. And this would be, now the 3rd generation of my family who is adopted. I've always viewed it as this incredibly beautiful thing, something that can change lives if done right. I do want to be responsible in saying there are many situations in the world where adoptions have not been done correctly. The Netherlands actually, very recently, within the last month or two, has stopped all international adoptions, I believe, as a result of
From Dutch people adopting outside of Holland?
yes, because they found that there were certain countries where birth certificates were being falsified. Those children who are now my age traveled back, showed up in court, showed it, and they found that they were paid. People were being paid to show up in court to act as biological parents. So, So in Holland right now there's a sort of a temporary moratorium on adoptions, but if done right, I think it allows for, and certainly I'm a proponent, right? I've adopted 2 children domestically and internationally. I think it allows for a life that, you know, someone could have never had. I would never be sitting here with you. I would never have written this book. I would never be an air traffic controller. I would never be married to my husband had I not been adopted.
Right.
Those are impossibilities when you're dealing with poverty and you're dealing with distance and you're dealing with, you know, the ability to grow a family and or to rise financially. A lot, you know this. You're very well traveled. A lot of places around the world, you are born into a social strata, and it's very hard to climb out of that.
Mm-hmm.
The United States allows for that.
Right.
Yeah.
Racism.
Don't like it.
What do you want your readers to get out of your experiences? And you haven't even really talked a little bit about, but you've had numerous experiences.
Yeah.
Some pretty intense ones.
As a child, I was prepped pretty well by my parents that I would face racism. But it was always something I thought they said that, you know, okay, but like as a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old, you're kind of thinking, is that what does that have to do with me? You know, in the same way that your parents talk to you at 7 maybe about like, one day you'll go to college, great,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't really register. However, for me, you know, I think I was 8 the first time 5 white boys from Louisiana called me the N-word. And I knew what it meant, you know, and I knew, and more than knowing what it meant.
Why did you know what it meant?
My parents had told me.
Okay.
They were very upfront with us, you know, which I loved. More than intellectually knowing what it meant, it felt terrible. And racism, that, you know, that kind of racism, the N-word, is sort of, it's an American thing, but I think as you go through the memoir, as people go through this memoir, they'll see that racism exists in every country in different ways. For example, when I lived in Jordan, when I moved to Jordan,
Mm-hmm.
one thing my parents didn't know that the two ethnicities, the 2 countries that came to work in Jordan as housekeepers were Sri Lankans and Filipinos, my sister and myself. So, you know that story I tell of my father opening the door to have his, you know, largely Arab
Yeah.
office come over, and people handing me their coat because they just assumed I was, you know, his help.
As a boy, by the way, though.
As a young boy too.
Yeah.
You know, sort of shocking, really, in that way.
Yeah.
At least from an American sensibility.
Correct.
And in Jordan too, there were roundups of Filipinos and Sri Lankans. This I didn't write about to great detail in the book, where instead of, you know, some level of due process, it would be they would pull Sri Lankans and Filipinos into police vehicles, take them all to jail, and then sort out who had overstayed visas, who was here legally, who was not. I was lucky in the sense that I had an American embassy ID, and I was able, in situations where that came up, to say I'm an American.
So it did come up for you.
Yeah, but of course I felt poorly that. What about other people that look like me that don't have that privilege? You know, that these things exist in so many different ways. I tell the story of being on a flight from Europe back to the United States shortly after 9/11, and having a woman turn to me and say, "You look like one of the terrorists from September 11th." Honestly, that hurt more than any of the others. That was devastating to me. You know, that someone would say that to a teenager that that you would somehow be slotted into that. That was incredibly difficult. And it's happened twice. It's happened in my adult life as well.
Has it happened with your kids or with you as a family?
It hasn't happened to my kids, but it will. And that's the thing. My husband's white, and I try to prepare him for this. And I tell him, you have really got to get your mind around the fact that this is going to happen one day, and you are going to be devastated on behalf of our children. I already know what it feels like, and I've already dealt with it, and I'm prepared. I really am. But he may disagree with me, but I'm not sure that he is prepared for what it feels like to be a white parent who is facing their child being called the N-word or being discriminated against, or in the worst case, as we've seen time and time again here, being detained and or arrested and then potentially shot, sometimes killed. These are very serious issues the United States is trying to deal with now. And I don't mean for this to be so, I know this is to some degree a bit more lighthearted, but all of this plays together, You asked if it's happened as a family. Very luckily, no. I think that also has a lot to do with where we live and where we travel. And we've made very thoughtful choices about not traveling to places that maybe would put us in that situation.
Yet, you lived in those places,
And I love that you bring that up, because that's extremely sad for me, actually. I love Egypt. As you know, I ran the 400 meters in Egypt for years. I love Syria. Obviously, Syria, for many different reasons, is not a place that almost anyone can travel to right now.
Right.
But there are more countries in the world that I can't go to than that we can as a family. And I think that's something for straight people to consider and know about. And I think it's something that maybe gay families who haven't considered that should think about. There's an element of passport control where you can, we have hyphenated last names. So my name is Garon Wade. My husband's name, some people might know him already. He's an author, obviously. His name is James Suriano. Our kids have Suriano-Wade. Going through passport control, you're obviously tied together.
Right.
It's not something I thought about when we were choosing names. Would I do it differently? No, because I don't feel we should have to. But I do think that there's a lot of, it's very restrictive, My father is actually getting ready to move to Kazakhstan next month. And I asked him, had a phone conversation with him yesterday in Italy, and I said, what do you think, Dad? Can we all come? And he said, I don't know. We're all going to have to research this very, very thoughtfully.
Is he nervous about, he still goes all over the...
Oh, he's not nervous about that, no.
No.
Oh,
how old is he?
He's 72. Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah, he once told me, and I love this, and I'll share it here. He said, I don't give a shit about dying. I care about living. And I thought, yeah, man, that's
pretty...
summarizes his life, really.
Yep. That's great. All right. Sorry. Homophobia. You talk a little bit, not as much.
Yeah. Homophobia. Who is it? Is it? I don't know. I want to say it's Samuel Jackson, but maybe it's not. But I'm gonna say it's him. He also has a great voice. But I believe he said, homophobia. It's not that you're scared of gay people. It's that you're an asshole. I think that that's true. Why would anyone care? I've always said that if I were straight, I think I would be an enormous proponent of gay people. In the same way that
coming from your family.
Yes. In the same way that I'm such a big proponent of women's rights, I consider myself a feminist. You can go down the line on these issues. Homophobia, though, because I was raised with a mother who was a sex ed teacher, and because we were raised in such a liberal environment, it was very weird for me to come to the United States in 2004, and then realize that so many people are homophobic. Because I certainly didn't feel that way towards gay people, even before I realized I was gay, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I never had that shame at
Totally
heart.
get it, because I was the exact opposite of you, which caused me to have...
Did it take years?
It took me years, yeah. I'm in a different generation, but yes. So I can really appreciate that's how you never had that.
Right.
Which is awesome.
Right, and it I can remember I went to the University of Texas at Austin. And I remember at the time holding my then boyfriend's hand and having the football players, they were living a different life than us, obviously. They were riding through campus in SUVs. And they made it a point to stop, roll down the window, and scream out "faggot," and that was my sort of introduction to American like homophobia.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, in the book, in this memoir, you get to travel back to Luling, Louisiana, and visit my my grandmother's ideas of what gay means, who's gay, why was I gay, was the whole family gay. It remains to me still to this day quite interesting. I do want to say that I think that she made progress, perhaps more on gay issues than on race, and I found that fascinating.
Yes, in a sad way, because
Yeah.
I think that speaks not just to your grandmother, but to society at large. Right?
Sure. But one would think race has been around for longer. You might have processed that earlier.
One would think, but yeah.
Yeah.
So one more theme that not as recurrent, but still certainly was there, was abuse. Different types of abuse. You want to talk about that?
Sure. This is something like, for me, that this is the first time I'm publicly talking about it, and I think it's important for me to do so because I want for anyone who's out there who's been through it to know that it happens. I was raised to really understand the importance of being in a loving relationship and not being violent with each other. My parents had a really beautiful relationship in that way. Very much an example to, I think, almost anyone. I never saw my parents hurt each other ever.
Did they at least get in a fight now and
Oh,
then?
yeah.
I mean, I think you mentioned that
come
a couple
on.
of times.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, good.
Yes. But, as you now know, when I moved to Texas for college, I ended up in a relationship for many years, the majority of my college time. Mm-hmm. And Chad, was on paper and really in the beginning this really attractive, very, very handsome, very well spoken. Everyone liked him, kind of person. That's what was going on at the surface, and then behind the scenes, he was very much not a confident person and an alcoholic, and tried to kill me, which is.
And he was a good deal older than you as well, correct?
He was almost 20 years older than me. For years I buried that, It's hard. Even to talk about it now, it's hard for me. It's because I felt I was so much stronger than that. It was hard for me to understand why I would place myself in that situation. But of course, it's not the victim's fault ever, right? So even now, at the age of 35, this was happening when I was 19, 20, 21, I look back and I have to tell myself, but it wasn't actually your fault.
But what do you want to tell people who are watching this or who read your book, who are in a relationship that's not healthy, about making a decision maybe to get out of that?
It's hard, but get out. I had really the privilege of 2 times after I exited that relationship of being the friend that someone called 2 times when someone was abusing them. Mm-hmm. And both times, one was I was asleep, I was in bed, I got the call, and I got out of bed and I found that person in Washington, and I took them to a bar, and I had a very straightforward conversation with them and said, get out. This doesn't get better, get out. They did, and I'm really happy. I wish I had someone. It's not that I didn't have someone at the time, it's just that I never was willing to speak about it with other people at the time because I was ashamed, because I was thinking that it would make me as a man, as a person, look weak. And all of that's wrapped up into like toxic masculinity and how we raise boys to always be strong.
But yet, what's interesting about this is you had such loving parents.
Yes.
And so I think the example, the thing that I carry this that I want people to take away from is if it could happen to you, it could happen to anyone through no fault of your own. And so, but to recognize it as soon as you can, and as you said, it's not going to get better. So, get out.
Yeah, and it's that idea that I think especially for young people that might be watching this. I'm now. I mean, I know you think I'm.
You're young. You're young to me. You'll always be young to me.
That's the sequel. For people who are in their 20s who are watching this, just know that it's not normal. No one should be hitting you. No one should be threatening to kill you. I still have nightmares about this person. It's been 14 years.
Wow. Well, thank you for bringing that up as well, making that a part of the story. All right, now, on maybe a lighter note,
hopefully.
Let's talk about Muhammad.
Okay, all right. Muhammad. Yeah.
Coming out in Jordan.
Yeah, coming out in Jordan. Who wants to do that?
I mean, I thought I had a really strange coming out experience.
I had always had girlfriends, and they were fairly innocent situations with girls, but I was into it, certainly. I mean, at least I recall being into it for sure. And then came Muhammad when I was in 10th grade in Jordan, and it was my first time physically having a sexual experience or a sexual experience on some levels with a guy, and that for me was fine, because as we talked about, I had none of the shame that it shouldn't be a situation.
Right.
But it changed my life, obviously. I mean, that first moment of sort of awakening. I said that I had, been with a lot of other women, but this was by far the most sexual thing, and it wasn't even really what we would call sex now as adults sitting here.
Right.
It was more like lying in a bed with our legs touching and rubbing our legs against each other.
I can remember just, how that felt, though. It was like your whole body was on fire, and it just ignited this, this flame.
Exactly. It takes over,
But, it's so interesting, though, because you were so comfortable with yourself, even living in a country like Jordan. And what made you so comfortable?
My parents. It doesn't make sense from the outset. For sure, it doesn't make sense from the outset, because I then told friends, as you know, like, hey, I think I'm bisexual. And they
were cool with it.
And they were cool with it. They were international kids,
Okay.
I think it may have been different in 2002 to tell that to an Arab kid. But, the majority of my friends were Arab kids. I think my parents, that was yet again, they made me feel, and my sister and my brother, like, hey, if you guys are gay, if you're bisexual, if you're whatever, we are cool, So as soon as I realized, like, hey, I like guys, I kind of ran with it. But there was also not a whole lot of options or opportunities. So it sort of was something I dealt with, but wasn't able to really, truly, I didn't have sex until I was 19. So, you know what I mean? Like, there's a couple of years there where it's...
We won't talk about those kind of gaps with me, but okay. You talk in your book, you had a very unfriendly encounter with a baboon, which most people do not have.
True.
Friendly or unfriendly, for that matter.
Yeah.
But as a result of this, I remember you saying, it was a small victory for my young self, and one of the first times I realized that my voice really mattered. So I guess the baboon, you played a role in making sure that the baboon was not put down to sleep, instead reintegrated into wildhood. But finding your voice, I realized that my voice really mattered.
Yeah, it was a young victory. I mean, it was a situation where I was lying in the nurse's office at school, getting ready to be taken to the American embassy to get pumped with rabies boosters, because I'd been attacked somewhat viciously, like by a baboon at school during PE. And from everything that I heard was that they were certainly gonna kill this animal, and I was very against that. I felt like this wasn't really the right thing to do. I mean, this is a child's mind, and maybe I would feel differently now as an adult, but I made that known. I spoke about that very openly, and in the end, they did not. They actually brought a primatologist into the Gambia, and she took him to an expanse of land. I'm sure it was a reserve of some sort, and one, named him after me, which is interesting,
cool.
and two, and released him into the wild.
But so what is that? So how did finding your voice, like, what did that mean for you?
You know, at the home, it was our voices were always recognized, but I felt in that setting, in a public setting where there were multiple adults who were not my parents, who were saying,
impressive.
kill him, and then being like, hang on, the kid is saying no. Maybe it made them consider other options.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So Spence Chapin
Yeah.
was the adoption agency that you used for your international adoption with Emmanuel.
Correct.
So can you talk about what that was like, what your experience was,
Yeah.
how much you worked with Spence Chapin?
Sure. I in 2016, we had tried to adopt another child from DC, and there was a night that came where we were told we had a daughter, and the next morning we were told that the mother had changed her mind, but the birth mother had also tested positive for narcotics. The child was being taken to foster care, and neither she nor us, we would not get the child. It was tough, but it was understandable, and at that time I called up our social worker, Maureen Kinney, who was an amazing social worker in DC, and said, Maureen, it's not going so well, this happened. And she said, have you heard about this program in South Africa? And I said, no. And she said, it's run out of Manhattan by an organization called Spence Chapin. And so very quickly when I heard South Africa, having grown up there, I was so excited to know that this was an option, especially for a gay married couple.
Right.
People should also know that
very few options.
there's very few options. Yeah. I believe currently it's just South Africa and Colombia.
Correct.
And so, we got on the phone with Spence, and it was like, it took no time at all for me to be convinced, but I did have to convince my husband a little bit. But we made the choice. And we worked with Spence for 4 years. It was a very long adoption. We adopted our son Mateo in 3 weeks from the time we talked to an agency, and it took us 4 years with Spence Chapin. But that is not on Spence Chapin's side, that is the interaction with the South African government.
And is that typical then, do you know?
It's become more typical with South Africa. Oh. Yes, it used to be a year, and it truly was a year, and it's just been extended and extended. Families are waiting like between 2.5 to 3 or 4 years now. Our experience with Spence Chapin was wonderful, really, in many respects. It was nice to have a charted path, even though it changed a couple times. The idea was that there are an abundance of children in South Africa who need a home, and there's no parental rights that can be changed here and there as you get your child, which is certainly what we dealt with our son here in America. And so that in itself was just a really great reason to run with it. They were an extremely supportive operation. 4 years. I mean, you probably right? For you almost form a relationship with these people.
You do form a relationship. Yes. So Spence Chapin, and to disclosure, they're one of our family building partners for Gays with Kids. For those who come to our website, our Becoming section, and are interested in pursuing adoption, international or domestic, Spence Chapin is provide a lot of our content,
right?
And we're happy to connect you with them.
Yeah.
So the last thing, you were married. You and James were married, and the officiants at the wedding were your dad and his mom.
Correct. Yeah. How nice is that?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So did they have to go online and? Well, your dad probably, I'm going to presume, was already able to wed people through something with his job?
No. So I mean, in practical speaking, right? We got married legally in DC. But they married us in ceremony so they didn't go online. No, they didn't but they married us in ceremony. We brought 70 of our friends down here actually on a yacht in Lauderdale, and
that must have been amazing.
It was beautiful. It was. I'm still waiting for someone to invite me to one of those weddings, because I didn't really. I don't know if you feel this way, but I'm very happy we had our wedding. But to some degree, it's not like thoroughly enjoyable. I think,
of course,
because you're like the center of it.
Yes, we got married as well. I had a wedding too that we ran. It was about 75 people, I think, were at our wedding. So I get it. You're sort of enjoying it, but not. You miss out on a lot.
And you're all these people that have traveled from some people were coming from Uzbekistan. So
we didn't have anyone from Uzbekistan in my wedding. I don't know why. With my husband first.
You want to give these people, your time, because they've been so gracious to travel so far. I also didn't drink at my wedding, which, I very much enjoy drink. And, it was like I wanted to remember all of it and be present. So I didn't. But now I'm waiting.
You're ready. Okay.
I'm ready.
So anyone who wants to get married in Fort Lauderdale on a yacht, please invite Garon.
Invite Garon Wade,
He'll be a very fun wedding guest.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to tell us about the book that I didn't ask you about, or about your life?
I'm really grateful to anyone that would consider reading this book. There's a lot of questions as to who's going to read this book. And my answer is, honestly, I'm waiting to find out. I mean, I have an idea who will read this book, but a journey around the world to more than 15 countries, a story of family in America and family across the world, and race and homophobia embedded in Southern culture, and the juxtaposition between two very different worlds. This all comes to play in this memoir. I'm really proud to have written it. I do want to say I have the most incredible editor, because I mean, any author that's talking about writing a book and not mentioning their editor, I think that you should. I mean, the amount of it is really a collaborative effort, and I have an extraordinary editor in Heather Sangster, who is in Canada, and we have worked for many months and many revisions together, and she's exquisite and insightful, and I'm just very grateful to her for everything that she has helped me to bring this book to its sort of full potential.
Well, thank you. I want to say I don't get to read nearly as much as I used to before I was a dad. This is one of the only books I've read in a long time.
Thank you.
And I laughed, I cried a lot. It was great, I learned a lot, and I encourage you guys to pick it up. You'll Always Be White to Me, June 15th, 2021, and you can get it through the links below.
Thank you so much.